For a period of approximately 4 months between September and December of 2018, I experienced a consistent and sustained effort by many people within the government to seek to politically interfere in the exercise of prosecutorial discretion in my role as the Attorney General of Canada in an inappropriate effort to secure a deferred prosecution agreement with SNC-Lavalin. These events involved 11 people, excluding myself and my political staff, from the Prime Minister's office, the Privy Council office, and the Office of the Minister of Finance. This included in-person conversations, telephone calls, emails, and text messages. There were approximately 10 phone calls and 10 meetings specifically about SNC, and I and/or my staff were a part of these meetings. Within these conversations, there were expressed statements regarding the necessity of interference in the SNC-Lavalin matter, the potential of consequences, and veiled threats if a DPA was not made available to SNC. My goal in my testimony is to outline the details of these communications for the committee and indeed all Canadians. My Chief of Staff had a phone call with Mathieu Bouchard and Elder Marquez from the Prime Minister's office. They wanted to discuss SNC. They told her that SNC had made further submissions to the Crown and that there is some softening, but not much. They said that they understood that the individual Crown prosecutor wants to negotiate an agreement, but the director does not. They said that they think we should be able to find a more reasonable resolution here. They told her that SNC's next board meeting is on Thursday, which was September the 20th. They also mentioned the Quebec election context. They asked my chief if someone has suggested the outside idea to the PPSC and asked whether or not we were open to this suggestion. They wanted to know if my deputy could do it. In response, my Chief of Staff stressed to them prosecutorial independence and potential concerns about the interference in the independence of the prosecutorial functions. Mr. Bouchard and Mr. Marquez kept telling her that they didn't want to cross any lines, but they asked my Chief of Staff to follow up with me directly on this matter. Monday, September 17th, I have my one-on-one meeting with the Prime Minister that I requested a couple of weeks ago. When I walked in, the clerk of the Privy Council was in attendance as well. While the meeting was not about the issue of SNC and DPAs, the Prime Minister raised the issue immediately. The Prime Minister asked me to help out, to find a solution here for SNC, citing that if there is no DPA, there would be many jobs lost and that SNC would move from Montreal. In response, I explained to him the law and what I have the ability to do and not do under the Director of Public Prosecutions Act around issuing directives or assuming conduct of prosecutions. I told him that I had done my due diligence and had made up my mind on SNC and that I was not going to interfere with the decision of the Director. The Prime Minister again cited the potential loss of jobs and SNC moving. Then, to my surprise, the clerk started to make the case for the need for a DPA. He said, quote, "There is a board meeting on Thursday, September the 20th, with stockholders," end quote. Quote again, "They will likely be moving to London if this happens, and there is an election in Quebec soon," end quote. At that point, the Prime Minister jumped in, stressing that there is an election in Quebec and that, quote, "I am an MP in Quebec, the member for Papineau," end quote. Today, my Chief of Staff had a phone call with Elder Marquez and Mathieu Bouchard from the Prime Minister's office. They wanted an update on what was going on regarding the DPAs since, quote, "we don't have a ton of time," end quote. She relayed my summary of the meeting with the clerk and the Prime Minister. Mathieu and Elder also raised the idea of a, quote, "informal reach out," end quote, to the DPP. My Chief of Staff said that she knew I was not comfortable with that, as it looked like and probably did constitute political interference. They asked whether that was true if it wasn't the Attorney General herself, but if it was her staff or the Deputy Minister. My Chief of Staff said yes, it would, and offered a call with me directly. They said that they will regroup and get back to you on that. Still on September the 19th, I spoke to Minister Morneau on this matter when we were in the House. He again stressed the need to save jobs, and I told him that engagements from his office to mine on SNC had to stop, that they were inappropriate. They did not stop. Mathieu said that if 6 months from the election, SNC announces they're moving their headquarters out of Canada, that is bad. He said, quote, we can have the best policy in the world, but we need to get reelected, end quote. In my view, the communications and efforts to change my mind on this matter should have stopped. Various officials also urged me to take partisan political considerations into account, which it was clearly improper for me to do so. We either have a system that is based on the rule of law, the independence of prosecutorial functions, and respect for those charged to use their discretion and powers in a particular way, or we do not. The consistent and enduring efforts, even in the face of judicial proceedings on the same matter, and in the face of a clear decision of the Director of Public Prosecutions and the Attorney General to continue and even intensify such efforts, raises serious red flags in my view. This brings me to the final events in the chronology, the ones that signal, in my experience, the final escalation in efforts by the Prime Minister's office to interfere in this matter. On December 18th of 2018, my Chief of Staff was urgently summoned to a meeting with Jerry Butts and Katie Telford to discuss SNC. They wanted to know where I am at in terms of finding a solution. They told her that they felt like the issue was getting worse and that I was not doing anything. They referenced a possible call with the Prime Minister and the clerk the next day. Given what occurred the previous day with my Chief of Staff, I was determined to end all interference and conversations about this matter once and for all. Here's part of what the clerk and I discussed. The clerk said he was calling about DPA's SNC. He said he wanted to pass on where the Prime Minister is at. He spoke about the company's board and the possibility of them selling out to someone else, moving their headquarters, and job losses. He said that the Prime Minister wants to be able to say that he has tried everything he can within the legitimate toolbox. The clerk said that the Prime Minister is quite determined, quite firm, but he wants to know why the DPA route, which Parliament provided for, isn't being used. He said, quote, I think he is going to find a way to get it done, one way or another. So he is in that kind of mood, and I wanted you to be aware of it, end quote. I warned the clerk in this meeting that he was in this call that we were treading on dangerous ground here. I also issued a stern warning because as the Attorney General, I cannot act in a manner, and the prosecution cannot act in a manner that is not objective, that isn't independent. I cannot act in a partisan way, and I cannot be politically motivated. This all screams of that. He said again that the Prime Minister was in a pretty firm frame of mind about this, and that he was a bit worried. I asked what he's worried about. The clerk then made the comment about how it is not good for the Prime Minister and his Attorney General to be at loggerheads. The clerk said that he was worried about a collision between the Prime Minister, because the Prime Minister is pretty firm about this. He told me that he had seen the Prime Minister a few hours ago and that this is really important to him. That is essentially where the conversation ended, and I did not hear from the Prime Minister the next day. On January the 7th, I received a call from the Prime Minister and was informed I was being shuffled out of my role as Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. I will not go into details of this call or subsequent communications about the shuffle, but I will say that I stated I believe the reason was because of the SNC matter. They denied this to be the case. My narrative stops here. I was taught to always be careful what you say because you cannot take it back. I was taught to always hold true to your core values and principles, and to act with integrity. These are the teachings of my parents, my grandparents, and my community. I come from a long line of matriarchs, and I am a truth teller, in accordance with the laws and traditions of our big house. This is who I am, and this is who I always will be.